I'm standing in the Annapolis National Cemetery. It's a military cemetery. It's about a stone's throw from the Naval Academy, where I spoke last night. And some people wonder whenever a minister of the gospel, a priest, a bishop speaks at a military academy to military people, is there a contradiction between the commitment to be a soldier and the gospel? And of course, I see where the tension comes from. The Sermon on the Mount, the love of enemies is central. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who maltreat you. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn and give them the other. Resist not evil, Jesus says. So there is, of course, coming up out of the Sermon on the Mount, a great tradition of nonviolence within Christianity. In point of fact, in the early centuries, a lot of Christians felt, no, they couldn't serve in the armed forces. They had to walk the peaceful way of Jesus. Well, I've spoken many times before about the extraordinary power of the path of nonviolence. And when you see it practiced by someone like Martin Luther King, who knew those texts very well, it can be, in certain circumstances, a very effective way, lovingly to engage the wickedness of another. I've compared it sometimes to Aikido, the martial art where you use the momentum of your opponent against him. So I believe very much in the power of nonviolence, both as a witness, but also as an effective tool in opposing violence. But let me add this now. When you get to the 4th century and a figure like St. Augustine of Hippo, the Christian church is realizing that, granted all of that and not gainsaying any of it, we live in such a finite, conflictual world, sinful world, a fallen world, that sometimes the only way to oppose great wickedness is to use violence or use force. Now, begin not at the grand national level, but at the very personal level to see the point. You're the father of a family. Someone has invaded your home. They're threatening your wife and children. Well, what do? You're unlikely to stage a nonviolent social protest. At that point, you're going to use force to defend the lives of the innocent. So extrapolate from that. That's what Augustine does. Extrapolate from that experience now to the national level. If a nation is being aggressed in such a way that innocent life is being threatened, sometimes in this fallen, finite, conflictual, sinful world, you have to use requisite force to protect the innocent. And it's from that instinct that the so-called just war theory emerges. Augustine being one of the great exponents of it, St. Thomas Aquinas adding to it, and then throughout the Catholic tradition, people have added nuance to it. And I want to make the point that the just war theory, far from a warmongering exercise, far from, justifying all war, is in fact setting very severe limits to war. You might say always haunting the just war theory is Jesus' great call to the love of enemies and so on. So what are some of these criteria that the Catholic tradition has invoked to justify war in certain circumstances? Well, here's the first one. A just war must be declared by a competent authority. That's to say, some government agency or individual who speaks for the totality of the people. So a just war is not one that's prompted by some particular group or some family working out a problem. It's declared by some agency that speaks for the whole people. Here's a second criterion. There must be a just cause. Now, in recent years, the church has really restricted this. The only finally just cause is when innocent life is being aggressively threatened. So when a country is being attacked or invaded, it may, as it were, put its arms up in self-defense. So there must be a competent authority declaring the war, a just cause. A third consideration, there's got to be a proportion between the goal to be attained and the terrible destructiveness of the war. And so if you're convinced that, no, that the price is just too high here, yes, we're trying to defend the innocent, but in the process we're going to cause far much more mayhem, well, then we're not dealing with a just war. A couple other criteria that I think are interesting. One is the reasonable hope of success. So entering into a just war, you have to have some sense that, yes, we're likely to be successful in this enterprise. If it's a hopeless undertaking, well, then it's not really a justified war. A final criterion is what we call the right intention of the belligerents or of the warriors. So even if the war is justified, but you're going into it with the wrong attitude, you're fighting for another reason. I just don't like those, Germans or Japanese or Russians. Well, that's not a legitimate ground. Now, here's the thing. For the war to be justified, all of these criteria have to obtain simultaneously. All of them have to be the case. Now, I hope you can see from that far from, encouraging war, these are setting very strict limits on war. Moreover, what I've just described are called the jus ad bellum requirements. That means, justice on the way to war. So what would justify going to war? There are two more criteria called the jus in bello criteria. That means what's justified in the actual fighting of the war. And here we have two very interesting ones, namely proportionality. So again, there's some proportion between the goal to be obtained and the destructiveness of the means being used. And the second criterion is discrimination, that we can discriminate between combatants and non-combatants. So there's not a wanton destruction of the lives of innocents, because that would defeat the whole purpose. I'm trying to protect the lives of the innocent. So, for example, let's say, and I think most would agree with this, that World War II met the criteria for the jus ad bellum. That we'd say, yeah, World War II was a justified war. Nevertheless, when it comes to the actual fighting World War II, there are certain elements I think now we'd have to say were not justified. Think of those terrible fire bombings of Dresden and Frankfurt and Tokyo, not to mention the atomic bombs, which in my judgment and that of I think most others, would violate both proportionality and discrimination. Again, we're setting severe limits to war, always keeping in mind the great command to love. Now, keep that in mind. To love means to will the good of the other. What's the motivating justification for war? It's the protection of the innocent. That's an act of love. See, don't set love and warfare necessarily as opposed to each other. To love is to will the good of the other. The father defending his family is loving his family, right? And so soldiers defending their country in a just war are engaging in an act of love. Now, as you see behind me, the graves of all these soldiers, can we, with great admiration, remark the virtue in these people? And I'd say, yeah. Think of the great cardinal virtues, justice being one of them. Yeah, people that went to war convinced that they were fighting in a just war, trying to set something right. They were following the virtue of justice. Think of the virtue of prudence. That's kind of canny moral know-how. Sure, they exhibited that. The virtue of temperance. That means the self-control required in order to get the job done morally. I think of the kids I met yesterday at the Naval Academy going through all their different forms of training, and they're being, compelled to discipline their own passions and desires, to discipline their own bodies. Well, that's a virtue of temperance required for the achievement of justice. And then, of course, probably most obviously, courage, the great virtue. It's hard to imagine any sailor or soldier not exhibiting courage. So we think of the paradigmatic soldier fighting in a just war, someone who exhibits these great virtues and someone whom we admire and who is finally ordered to and by love. And that's why even as we honor the great tradition of nonviolence, as we should, we can also honor those who are willing to fight in a just war. Let me make just one more observation. My mentor, Cardinal George, said this years ago, and it's always stayed in my mind. Like me, Cardinal George admired people like Dorothy Day, who was a pacifist. Think of Stanley Hauerwas, a theologian I admire very much, who's a strict pacifist. Cardinal George said, I'm glad there are some pacifists in the church, the same way I'm glad there are some celibates in the church. Now, what did he mean? Well, both celibates, those who don't marry, and pacifists, those who will not fight, are living even now as we will all live in the kingdom of God. Remember, Jesus says, well, in the kingdom of God, no one is married or given in marriage because we're living at a higher pitch of intensity. So celibates here below, like pacifists here below, are witnessing to that place of utter love and utter peace that we aspire to. But mind you, Cardinal George said, I don't want everyone to be a celibate here below, nor do I want everyone to be a pacifist. And I think that's a very good way to honor all the various values involved. So as I finished my talk last night at the Naval Academy, I'm in this magnificent chapel and the windows are filled with these inspiring scenes. And one of them is two stained glass windows that kind of speak to each other. One is Michael, the warrior angel, but on the other side is an angel holding the dove of peace. And the point is that all just war finally serves the purposes of peace. And I would say finally serves the purpose of love, the defense of the innocent.